Param, we kind of ran a little longer in our first session, but the good news is they're all warmed up for you. If you want to turn your mic on and just say a quick hello so we know that we can hear you.
Hi, Pinkesh, can you hear me?
Super, loud and clear.
Awesome.
Well, the second session is going to be a super layer on top of an already existing, exciting first one that we've had. Param is a chief design officer and leads the behavioral science and design function at Fractal. Fractal is a very large, very well-known, repute AI company, and kind of design in AI. We thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to also bring this aspect. On one hand, we're kind of getting more advanced with our AI and machine learning. On the other hand, how do we simplify the so-called complex? And so Param, with his 23 years of experience, has worked in design and innovation roles across companies like IDEO, Dr. Reddy's, GE Healthcare, across the industry, across the spectrum, if you will. In fact, a lot of work that Param has done is not only inspired hundreds and thousands of people, but there's actually a featured case study, for some of the work led by Param and IDEO. So in some sense, we are talking to a true celebrity, and I'm glad you could make it. Param, one of the things that was fascinating when I first met him was this notion, and in fact, his passion about mindfulness and art of stillness. I'm sure he's going to talk a little bit about that as well. But without further ado, Param, all yours.
Thank you, Pinkesh. Very honored and humbled to be listening to such a generous introduction. Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Loud and clear.
Okay, this is the first time I'm doing one of these online things, talking to 408 people.
Yeah, welcome to the new normal.
Yes, there's always a first time. So let me try and share my screen and get started. Just hang on. Awesome. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining this session, and lovely to have a bunch of people from all over the world, I presume, joining in for the session. I was invited by Pinkesh to talk about designing for the invisible and designing for AI. And I thought that was an intriguing topic, and certainly super interesting as a conversation to think about, what does the world of AI and what is the world of design when they come together? What does that look like? And how does that change how we think about, solving for some of these new challenges? So in the next few minutes, I'm going to be sharing some thoughts and, principles and some broad ways of thinking about what are the ways in which we can think about designing for AI in a better way. And then, of course, happy to take any questions and, keep it as conversational as possible. So when I got this topic, I was, intrigued by this idea of what is invisible, right? And, asked myself this question: what does invisible look like? No pun intended. As I started unpacking it, there were different dimensions of it. One is, of course, invisible means hidden, and if you think about this in the context of AI, there are so many products that we are now using in our daily lives where the AI so-called is hidden and is, pretty much invisible because it's so, it's so layered below what we use that we can't see it or know that there is AI behind it. Most people who use it probably don't even know that it has AI in it. So that's one sort of manifestation or example of that. The other is this voice assistant for doctors, a company called Suki. This is an example of how the physical world, where a doctor would have been entering some records onto a laptop or a desktop in the old world, is now entering that same patient information using a voice-enabled smartphone or whatever, voice-enabled app on a smartphone. And so that's intangible, right? And that's another example of something moving to invisible. The third one is when some of the interactions that we have with the devices or the software that we are using become omnipresent and so well integrated into our daily lives. This is an example of the Apple CarPlay. And so it becomes so omnipresent and integrated that is also something that one would, one can imagine as being invisible. Um, and so, I think we all fairly, very clearly know and understand that AI is driving a fundamental shift in our world in many ways, and it's still unfolding as we speak. And there's only more to come. But there are a few that I'm going to talk about, and then exemplify many of these as we go further. For example, the notion of active to passive. There are a lot of things that we used to do actively in the pre-AI world, and now it's becoming easier to do many of those passively because AI is simplifying that and making it change the way we interact with devices. Similarly, a lot of things we used to do manually are moving to automated sort of scenarios, either fully automated or partially automated. There are also examples where we used to do a lot of mundane things, whether it's filing expenses, by submitting some bills and papers or whatever, and much of that can be easily automated through some of these algorithms, and so in some ways this almost feels like magic, right? When a lot of these mundane things become so simplified. So I mean, those are just a few, and I'm going to talk many more about many more of such shifts. But really, I think I wanted to first talk about the fact that what are we actually designing for, right? And I think all of us would agree that whether there is AI or not, and even if there is AI, ultimately we are designing for people. And when you talk about designing for people, what we're really talking about is designing for emotions. And the reason I say that is several years ago, a person by name Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize for his work in pioneering behavioral economics. And so a lot of this work and many other sort of experts have come up, have sort of talked about this idea that human decisions are fundamentally completely emotion driven, and they're not rational the way we think that we are rational people, right? We tend to rationalize a lot of our decisions post facto, and so there is that aspect of explaining what we do after we've done what we've done. But that explanation is a lot of rationalization. It's not really how we arrived at that decision, or why we took that decision. And so a lot of these emotions are actually driving how we think, how we feel, how we behave, how we what actions we take, and what decisions we make in our daily lives. And so I think I'd like to think of using this lens as we think about how can we design for better AI. And so that's the bulk of what I'm going to be talking about, with several examples, and and of course a question and answer in the end. So that's really the theme, which is designing for AI, and designing for AI for with designing AI for and with emotions, right? That's really what I'm going to be talking about. So let's start with a few examples, and talk about some of these facets, right? So this is an example of how what we used to do with in the mechanical or the sort of the manual way earlier with the vacuum cleaner, or of course even before vacuum cleaners, we would probably be using a regular sort of a mopper or whatever, and that has now shifted from a manual intervention to a fully automated intervention, where there are these robots or vacuum robots that go around the house and clean the the floor. And so when you think about this kind of a situation, when you're moving from a manual to a fully automated, and of course fully, there is a spectrum even within that concept of fully automated. It's not necessarily 100% automated, but in that situation, what are the things that we should be thinking about, right? So these are a bunch of questions that you'll see now with every example that I talk about, which is, in this case, for example, what will reinforce control, feedback, and a sense of accomplishment? And why I say that is because when you're using a vacuum cleaner, the physical way, the mechanical way, the earlier, you would use it with your hands and you would move it around. You would get that instant sense of control. You would get that instant feedback. Is it working? Is it not working? You can actually see the, whatever it is that you're cleaning on the floors, it's getting better or whatever, right? And that sense of feedback gives you that control, and vice versa. So how does that sense of control and feedback become clear, become present in a situation where it's an automated robot? What about a sense of accomplishment, right? When you work hard, sweeping your house with a vacuum cleaner for several minutes or hours, at the end of it you feel a sense of accomplishment. Now how does that change when you are using a robot, right? Of course, one can interpret it as there is no need for a sense of accomplishment because now the robot is doing its job and you are free to do something else. Or is there a way that you can build in a feature of some kind of an accomplishment or a sense of accomplishment or progress in this device in an automated situation, right? So for example, some of the ways to deal with it could be visibility, customization, override. So visibility, for example, when the machine is going all around the house, is there a certain visibility that the user would get on their mobile or on their other devices, which gives you a sense that yes, this is what's going on in the house, or this is how the work is happening. Is there a sense of customization? Can I say that, hey, don't go to this room today, or just focus on this part of the house? Is there a sense of override? Can I quickly override when there is something that goes wrong? So these are the ways in which we can deal with some of the emotional needs that drive this context. Pinkesh, I don't know how this works, but I'm assuming the questions would follow in the end. I should just
they are pouring in already, Parmeshwar, and so we'll let you kind of come to a natural halt or a conclusion, then we'll kind of pour the questions to you in as much as we can in the time frame that we have.
Okay, great, sure. The second one is this example of this whole transformation that's happened in banking over the last several years. And this is one particular one from China where there is so much data that Jack Ma's company has been collecting of consumers over time. And now you can actually run so much analysis using all of those different data points across longitudinal sort of data, and make very, very instant recommendations or decisions about whether to lend some money to someone or not. Now, from a user standpoint, when you think about it, I think one is, of course, it moves from being a laborious process to a magical process. That's one shift that's happening. But from a user standpoint, what drives trust and engagement, right? So, I would imagine that some technologies like these would get commoditized very soon, if not already become commoditized. And so, what would differentiate me going to this bank versus some other bank? And therefore, why how would I as a banking company create that trust and engagement? And that's something that would be important to think about. And I think the way to think about that from to address those emotional needs would be explainability. For example, if I'm entering in using this app, and if I'm applying for a loan, can I get a better understanding of what kind of data has been captured about me based on which those decisions are being made? Or can I get a sense of what were the criteria used for saying yes or no to me for that loan, right? Can there be more transparency in the way that loan is being offered to me, and so on? So those are the ways in which that I as a user would feel, yes, this is something that not just makes it convenient for me, but also builds trust and engagement for a more longer term perspective. The third example is this Kickstarter project that I came across recently, a while back actually. It's called Arsenal. I don't know if they've gone sort of production yet, but I thought the concept was quite cool, and I do a fair bit of photography myself, so I could relate with it. It basically is sort of an assistant for photographers, which can allow you to sort of determine the most optimal setting for shooting a scene because it has been able to analyze thousands and thousands of images over time, and it has learned about what works and what doesn't. And if you think about this from different points of view, the question that I'm asking here is, what do people value the most, right? And what I mean by that is, if you talk about a professional photographer who uses cameras like these, which are fairly complex and very, very advanced, or to a novice or an amateur photographer who's using an SLR but doesn't have the pedigree or the sort of the control of the camera like the professional photographer, how it would play out for both of these people using this device would be very interesting, right? So for the professional photographer, what he or she might look for is a sense of control and freedom, and maybe deburdening from the laborious process of doing the post-production on the photographs that he or she has shot, which is may run into thousands of photographs, right? That's one way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it is that it can actually rob them of that sense of control and freedom, because for a lot of professional photographers or serious hobbyists, using a camera like this is actually about giving them that sense of control, and therefore is this taking that away from them? So how do they feel about it, and therefore how are we giving that sense of control? How are we calibrating that sense of control for different types of people, right? And so while we've gone from a technique situation to a creativity situation, are we thinking about that differently for different types of users? So this is I thought, an interesting scenario. Building off of that, again, a camera sort of use case, again, sort of a, I think a fairly startup or a Kickstarter kind of project. But this is a clip that you can wear, and apparently it would sort of life log, as they call it, capture all the stuff that's happening through your day on video, and it would sort of analyze and pick a certain parts of the days, and sort of put a video together, which you can post on your social media or whatever. And so again, the question is, what do people value the most in this context from an emotional standpoint, right? And what drives that usage? And so here the notion is moving from constraints, which is that, oh, I have to carry a big camera and I have to, lug it around, and I have to be in everyone's face shooting all the time. And I don't know what parts of my day might be interesting or what might be boring. And moving to a situation where it's freeing you up from all of those decisions, and the algorithm or the AI's sort of system is being able to make those decisions for you, and learns through the process, right? So very, very interesting, different dynamic. So though the emotions are going to be a lot about the fear of missing out, what might be the moment that are worth capturing, and of course some of the bragging rights that come along, and those are things that that people will think about. This is an interesting one. Recently, I think it hasn't gone live yet, but I think they showcased it at CES last year, I believe. This is something that L'Oreal has put together. Let me play a quick video of this, and I'll come back to the question. But the question is, what emotional payoffs drive daily use versus special occasion use, right? Now, depending on the context of the product or service that you're making, is it a one-time use? Is it a daily use? Is it a special occasion use? Each of those moments, will have different level of different types of emotional payoffs. And therefore, how do you think about designing for each of those contexts differently? So I'm going to play this video. Hopefully it's going to play all right and you can hear and see it. In case, just let me know if you can.
Are you getting the most out of your beauty routine? Introducing Perso by L'Oreal, a 3-in-1 device for personalized beauty. Powered by artificial intelligence, Perso creates skincare, liquid lipstick, and foundation just for you, on demand. Plus, it gets smarter over time. How does it work? In the app, Perso leverages L'Oreal's Modiface technology to evaluate your skin. Then it assesses important environmental factors like pollution, air quality, and humidity. Perso even considers your top skincare concerns and priorities. Next, it engages its patented 3-cartridge system, using advanced robotics to dispense the perfect formula for you. Perso can even create personalized foundation using its precise shade finder tool. Want to create a signature lip? Perso can do that too. Or try color matching. Coordinate your lip with your dress, shoes, or the latest trends. So next time you're staring into your cabinet, ask yourself, could your beauty routine be working smarter for you? Now, there's an intelligent beauty device with L'Oreal's unparalleled expertise. Perso by L'Oreal. Personalized beauty comes home.
Pinkesh, were you able to hear that?
Absolutely. Lot of people are searching on Google how to find it now.
Okay, great. Hopefully there are a lot of women on this call, so yeah, I'd love to hear their feedback. But so I think the question that I was asking about this was, again, think of this as a kind of a cool gadget that you would buy. Of course, a lot of money you spend on, and then is it a special occasion use or is it a daily use product? And therefore, how would the context change the way you think about it, the emotional payoffs that would that the user would sort of look for or get, right? So can we, how does the context shift from an everyday mundane to a daily delight, right? So and therefore, how do we think about those payoffs? This is the next one, which is again, I'm always amused about how so many of these robot type cute looking gadgets and devices have come out, especially on Kickstarter. Many of them have not made it into reality, but I found one more of these. I don't know again if it's in production, but what I like about the concept here is the idea that the device or the voice assistant or the robot is not answering, but is also asking you questions or is engaging with you proactively, right? So I thought this was interesting, which is that, what drives credibility? What drives the notion of something being intelligent? Is it just answering questions, or is it also provoking curiosity and coming forth with certain points of view or questions, right? And that I thought was an interesting way of building emotional connections, the sense of humor, curiosity, quirkiness. These are all attributes that make people feel that this is not just a device or a piece of technology, but something that more that you can build an emotional connection with. And again, I mean, the technologies are still evolving, and a long way to go before it can get to the level of ease of fluidity or conversation with human beings. But I think it is getting there in some contexts. This is an interesting one, which is quite thought-provoking. Some might even think, out there as an example. But this is a company called Hereafter, and they basically record conversations with folks, who want to, leave their voice, so-called, or their memories to people who they leave behind after they die. And so it's a think of a scenario where, if I'm feeling down and if I want to talk to my loved one who passed away, I just like I talk to Siri or Alexa, I would say, hey, Alexa, I'm feeling down today. And so this person who has passed away and has recorded those voices, all those memories are the right memories are sort of put together, and conversations are sort of stitched together and brought up in context with that prompt. And so this person replies back saying, hey, I know how you feel on a bad day and blah, blah. All of it is recorded, but it's being, so it's moving more from just archiving, which is just record, just a sort of, a sort of a unintelligent way of recording what happened. But, that's more of just archiving. But it's moving to remembrance, which is in context, pulling out things which make sense and stitching it together. So I think the question here would be, what would drive an authentic experience? Because this context is extremely sensitive. It would require a huge amount of honesty and contextuality to the question being asked or the prompt being given. So, how do you move from it being just a gimmicky experience to being an authentic experience? And for that, a lot of those emotional needs would have to be focused on. The next one is, again, I don't know if this is in the real world yet, but a selfie type keyboard apparently. And so it's a virtual keyboard. And I thought this idea of the physical keyboard disappearing and, you having to just sort of gesture and type was interesting. But it also reminded me of the Google Glass when it first came out, and a lot of the backlash that happened initially because it just felt weird wearing, these geeky looking glasses, and people felt sort of alienated, or the social norms didn't sort of allow for that technology to take off at that point, right? And of course the Google Glass has come back in a different avatar now, and they've focused the context much more for a business to business sort of situations with manufacturing plants and other sort of areas where glass like that would make sense. But that's why the question is, what norms define acceptability, and what would allow you to blend in or stand out depends on what the user cares about in that context, right? So while it can be moving from inconvenience to simplification, it's important to consider these social norms and think about the relevance. The next one, which is of course a big rage now, TikTok. What is interesting about this is that a lot of the success that TikTok has had, while of course there are these two extremes from what I've heard. I'm not a hardcore, or I'm not a user of TikTok either. But I believe what there is the two extremes where you can just engage in a completely passive way, and the algorithm sort of throws up content to you, which is super relevant, and of course it keeps you addicted because it's just scrolling content. You don't even need to scroll; it just keeps hitting you. But it knows you so well that it gives you those recommendations in an intelligent way. The other is, of course, the creation part. It moves you from pure engagement to creation, because the act of creation is now simplified so much that you can, which is what I've written, which is projecting one's superpowers. What I mean by that is, you now suddenly become empowered to create very advanced looking, content or videos, or with cool effects and special effects and whatnot, and create all sorts of personas and fun stuff. And that suddenly, that's a superpower for people, who probably are very, very technology illiterate, or even actually completely illiterate. So, and so that's a powerful sort of shift. And therefore, again, what's the emotional payoffs that drive people to go from engagement to creation? And so, how is the technology enabling that? I think this is the last or the second last one, which is what are the mental models that drive interaction with the device, right? So if you look at this device, which is some kind of a assistant in an airport in Japan, I believe. And so many of these kind of, machines are going to start getting used in public environments. And so, what are the different people's mental models of a device or a gadget like this, right? For a senior citizen, for example, is the mental model of authority, right? Would let's say my dad, if you were to come in contact with a device like this, he would be modified by it. If he would interact with it, he would probably interact with it like the way he's talking to a cop or someone else in authority. Whereas if a young person interacts with this device, it might be more of a guide or a buddy. And so, what mental model would make that interaction change is something that is worth thinking about. I think this is the last one. And again, the same example that I talked about earlier about Suki, which is a voice assistant for doctors. A lot of the examples that I shared earlier before this, are fun and, more on the sort of entertainment and sort of social side. This one is an example, just like autonomous cars or any of these other situations. This is a context where, serious decisions are being made. There's a lot of lives at stake, literally. And so any mistakes, so-called, either real or perceived by the user, would have large consequences. And therefore, when a user is using a product like this, and this is just, I've taken Suki as a random example, but I'm sure the product is great. But if there were some kind of an error in the way that the doctor experienced the product the first time, or first few times he or she used it, what are the consequences of those ineffective interactions, right? Would the user feel that sense of loss of control or insecurity, and therefore would it result in skepticism? And therefore, when you're dealing with a lot of these applications, which are not fun, but really more of accountability focused context, then what are the ways in which we need to think about designing for those emotions, right? So this is worth thinking about in many of these new applications for AI. So in summary, I think these were all the questions that came up in these examples. But as you can see, these questions can be taken to any example of or any other context of AI being used, and would be mostly fairly relevant and worth thinking about as we think about solving for these contexts. With that, I will say thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know if I went over time or under, or
no, perfectly fine. This was amazing. I think the journey of your real world examples and case studies, I think, certainly makes it a lot more lively and contextual. In fact, it's funny you mentioned Suki. We had Puneet Singh, who is the co-founder and CEO of Suki, who was actually on the festival in the data science edition 2.5 weeks ago. In fact, you brought up another important point around emotions, especially trust. How do you design for trust? And we have a very interesting topic that I think Saptarshi from Swiggy is going to talk on June 23rd, just on that topic on, how do you design for building trust, especially now in the post-COVID world. And obviously companies like Swiggy are going to be seen with a certain skeptical lens. Do I order food, and do I know what's happening in the kitchen? Do I know what's happening with the delivery boy? But I think coming back to a few questions that have kind of bubbled up here, Smita had a good question. I think a couple other people chimed in. If you look at the layers of design, right from perhaps kind of the tenets of emotional design to interaction design to UX design to visual design, do you think the designing for AI is going to perhaps de-emphasize and potentially even eliminate this need for visual design, right? What's your guidance for designers, and how do you see this panning out in the next few years? Where a lot of focus today, a lot of buzz at least, if not focus, has been around visual design. Do you see that going away?
So I think, look, if I see the evolution of the world, of the design world in the last, especially 10 years, but I would say it's been happening gradually even before. I don't think, anyone who's thinking about design in a pure visual design sense anymore is probably not, thinking rightly about design. As I see it, design is today really looked at as a way of problem solving, as a way of understanding. It's not about making some making a product or a service and then thinking about how do you package it in a sexy way or in a cool way after the fact. It is more about what should we be fundamentally making that would be delightful to people, right? And that they care about, and then going about making that product, and then the so-called usage or selling of it would automatically happen, right? So that's the paradigm shift that's happened in the design world, I think, in the last decade or two. And so I think for me, the notion of visual design is important, of course, because it is an important attribute of design, but it's only the skin. And I like to give this analogy of cooking, right? I mean, it's like a good chef would spend a lot of time in a lot of things that happen before the final presentation, right? The final presentation of the plate is the last step. There's a hell of a lot of stuff that a good chef would do before that steps, including finding the right ingredients, designing the right recipe, of course, making the recipe based on her experience over time or his experience over time, finding the right ingredients, sourcing them, checking the quality of them, cooking it, of course, in the right way with whatever secret sauce that they have. And then, all of the preparation and all of that. And then you get the dish, and then it's presented in a beautiful way. So presentation matters, but it's the last step. If that's what you're focusing on or starting with, then that's, you're not going to get good design, or for that matter, a good product. That's what I believe.
Good point. I want to ask a question that I think has been posed by Amya Rai, experienced designer at IBM. I think Raminder Kaur had a similar question, who's a senior product manager at the Indian Express. Do you design around the technology once the technology is built, or do you lead the engineers with design? Do you design first based on the context of the user and then tell the technology guys to go build? Because in the context of AI, it's kind of slightly different. With a lot of these examples that you've mentioned, I'm sure no customer really asked for one or could visualize one.
Yeah.
And so in your world, as you design for the invisible and as you design for AI, who leads this charter?
Look, I think the notion that it's an either or, I don't think that paradigm exists anymore. I think we live in a world where we have to think about and it's about the designer being respectful and appreciative of the technology, as much as the technology has to be respectful and appreciative of design. And it's important, especially when it comes to disruptive and emerging technologies, right? When it's a disruptive technology or a new technology which doesn't exist today or is not mainstream, people will not understand or appreciate what that technology can do for them in a true sense, right? And therefore, yes, you can't go and ask. You should not, by the way, ever go and ask someone, "What do you want?" First of all, that's the wrong question to ask, right? I mean, a lot of people talk about this famous adage about, if Henry Ford had gone and asked, what people want, they would have said they want faster horses. I think that adage is it's incorrect, because it's a fundamentally bad question to ask. First of all, if you go and ask someone, "What do you want?" You should never ask that question. So understanding people and understanding their emotions doesn't mean that you have to go and ask people what they want. So there are methods and ways in which one goes about understanding needs. That's a whole session by itself. I'm not going to go into that now, but the point is, I think it's a collaborative effort, and I think designers need to explore and look at what technology makes possible, prototype, and put those prototypes in front of users. And learn from that experience, because only when people experience something can they actually sense or get a feeling of whether something makes sense for them or not. And more often than not, when someone experiences something new for the first time, more often than not, they would probably say, "Oh no, I'm not going to use this," or they might say, "Yes, this looks great," but if you ask them to pay money for it, they'll probably say no. But that doesn't mean
Absolutely.
that the product doesn't work. It just, you need a more nuanced way of understanding actually what needs work and what don't. So
empathy is king. Absolutely. I want to, we're running out of time. Our next fantastic speaker is also waiting. But I want to, acknowledge at least the quick questions that have come in from Rishabh, at Bosch, Digvijay. We have Syed, who had a good question, Anuradha, Subramaniam Ganeshan. There's one last question to kind of end this with from Smriti and a couple others as well. How much business, and a follow-up question, how much technology should a designer know in the new world?
Well, I think the general principle for everyone going forward is that everyone needs to be technologically savvy, and not just savvy, but fairly hands-on, right? I mean, I think that ship has sailed. Every one of us needs to be able to play with technology to a degree that that makes sense for their job or whatever, right? And that bar is only going up year on year, right? I mean, so in a few years from now, probably everyone will have to code, or that might be the expectation, right? I mean, and maybe coding will also become easier, right? Maybe people like me who have no idea how to code will learn and will be able to code because that's how easy it might become. So I think all of these notions are shifting a lot, and I think also the idea of disciplines are merging now, right? I mean, it's no longer
Cross-functional, yeah.
exactly. So things are going to happen at the intersection of disciplines. So I think that's the other thing which will also make people become a lot more technologically dependent.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we had, but keep your questions coming on the specific LinkedIn thread that has been created. Can we have the poll, the feedback poll on the screen? And, certainly would like to get some feedback so we know what to do next. How do we do it better? But hey, this was absolutely amazing, Param. Thanks for doing this. I know there's a lot going on right now, personally and professionally with you, but I truly appreciate you spending the time with the community and sharing your wisdom. Here's a little virtual badge for you. Do scan the QR code. There's some AI magic that will happen as well. But truly appreciate you doing this for the community. So
thank you.
A big thanks.
Thank you so much, Pinkesh and Menaka, and everyone. Thanks so much for logging in.